he can do that. Check, 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 check. You really need to test it and not make assumptions. But make sure, that's yours, I'm going to take it with me. Make sure you're starting with a good baseline, because here's the deal. When it comes later on, when we start talking about goals and objectives, if you don't have a baseline, what are we measuring against? If we don't have a benchmark, okay, we're going to make 80% progress. 80% of what? You got to have those baselines so that we know where we're going. That lets us come back to a year later, and the school system might say, well, gosh, we just think that little Johnny has made so much progress. And we go, wow, really? Because here we're on a 8-month functioning level, and wow, we're a year later and we're on an 8-month functioning level. But you got to have data. You got to have data to support what you're saying. It can't just be because I think so. That doesn't fly. So recommendations for whatever the team decides have to be based on outcomes of the evaluations. Now, if you have outside evals done, they have to consider them. They don't have to honor them. So if you have, and this is classic, let's say that we have a speech therapist who does an evaluation with a child, and we have a 9-year-old boy who is completely nonverbal and has absolutely no language whatsoever, and they come back to the table and say, well, here's our little eval, and here's what we've come up with, and we're going to offer you 30 minutes a week of speech therapy in a group setting for a completely nonverbal kid. That is pretty severe. How appropriate is that? Not very, right? So how do you handle that? What do you say? And this is something, again, you have to know what the questions are to ask. When they say, well, we think that based on the evaluation we've done, that 30 minutes a week in a group setting is what's appropriate. Again, I play dumb, but I say things like, wow, really? Okay, well, again, my child, I need to sleep at night here, so I really need you to help explain to me how it is that you arrived at this number. Because I'm looking at a 9-year-old boy who's completely nonverbal, that has some pretty significant issues, who, by the way, does not engage his peers, nor does he imitate. And he's very distracted by his environment. But we're doing group speech therapy for 30 minutes a week for a completely nonverbal child. I'm just curious. Just help me understand this. How did we arrive at that number? Can you please show me the data that you used to arrive at that? Because I'm just having a real hard time. And shut up. One of the biggest mistakes we can make, and I'm horrible with it, is talking way too much. Ask the questions, shut up. Wait for the answer. How'd you come up with it? And that's what you get. Did you see what he did? I was staring at him and he went. He shrugged his shoulders. And that's pretty much what you get too. That's funny. But that really is a lot of times what you get. But here's the deal, gang. If they're telling you that you get X, Y, and Z for your child, they'd better be able to quantify that. How do they come up with it? Where did we come up with these numbers, and how do we determine what's appropriate? And how, I know kids with a lisp that get more than 30 minutes a week of speech therapy. We have a completely nonverbal child. How is this happening? So you need to ask questions. And here's the deal. Don't be afraid you're going to make them mad. This is your child. And we have a window of opportunity that we've got to work with these kids that we can't afford to waste because we're afraid we're going to hurt somebody's feelings. Our kids' feelings are being hurt when they're not functional. Ask the questions. They need to be asked. Okay, we talked a minute ago about the ABLES and about how you can take the scoring sheets of the ABLES and turn that into really good IEP material. Goals and objectives need to be written in a measurable manner, okay? This is huge. If it's not measurable, how do we determine whether or not they're appropriately making progress? And I see it all the time. I see, again, I go back to what I said before. The classic one I see is that Johnny will increase his speech and language by 80%. 80% of what? 80% of what? What are we gauging that against? What do we have as a baseline? And the other thing, too, that you have to really watch for when you're looking at goals and objectives is not only are they measurable, but how are they being determined? And this is huge. I just did an IEP yesterday, and one of the things that we ran into was everything was teacher observation, teacher observation, teacher observation, teacher observation. Okay, great, fine, and wonderful. I'm all about teacher observation, but where's the data? Because teacher observation is subjective, and I've seen goofy stuff, like 6 years worth of goals of learning how to tie shoes, and you know, having them say, oh, and he's making progress. Because, you know, when he started, he couldn't do anything, but now he can go over and under and he can make one bunny loop. Okay, who's determining what progress is? Who makes that determination? Anybody know? No? This is what stinks. The school typically does. And part of the problem that you have with the reauthorization in 2004 is that we now have the burden of proof, whereas the school used to have it. So if the school is doing X, Y, and Z with your child and you're not in agreement with that, we have to prove why what the school is doing is inadequate and why what we're recommending is what's the appropriate thing to do for that child. And gang, that's not an easy task. It makes it very, very hard. So the most important thing I can tell you is do your homework. Because if you walk in and you say, I want this 'cause, that's not going to work. And just because Johnny got it is not a reason that you're going to get it. You've got to be able to show the need and have the data to support it. And peer-reviewed research studies, because when we ask for things, one of the big things with school systems now is they really are mandated to do peer-reviewed work. So you have to look at what studies are out there that are supporting what it is that you're requesting and make sure that when I write a letter, that letter I told you about that I send a week ahead of time, you know what else goes with that? All of the research on the particular things that I'm asking for, and sometimes my stack is that big, but I put all of the research about what I'm asking for, everything that I need that supports it. If I have letters from my physicians, if I have letters from my outside therapists, any of that all gets put in there. Now, what happens, I did skip one thing, let me say this. What happens if they do an evaluation and you're not in agreement with what that evaluation says? Not just from a standpoint of what the outcome is. We're going to do 30 minutes of speech therapy, but what if you're not even in agreement with